Hello, I'm Kevin Wirt, Chief Engagement Officer at Wakeen Pages. I think we can all agree that our advertising universe is evolving at an unprecedented rate. Whether we talk about data or media fragmentation or shifting consumer behavior, new technology can make things, confusing and for some of us, rather exciting. Forward with Kevin is a way for us to have a conversation, for us to really look at how all of these converging sort of technologies allow us to reach our audiences in an intentional and authentic way. We'll be having conversations with amazing partners across our industry, and our hope is that this podcast will be a way for us to not only share information, but for us to provoke ideas about how we can move forward in an industry that is not stopping anytime soon. So welcome to another episode of Forward with Kevin, who is me. And I was thinking leading into this next episode about, does Jimmy Fallon get excited? Like, does he get geeked out over some guests? Because I'm so giddy with having you guys come and join me. So I want to introduce you to Heather Myers, who is the principal at Triad Media Communications, and Joanna Drexel-Blevins, who is the chief strategist at Wakeen Strategies. So Joanna, Heather, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So the reason I geek out a little bit is I like to think of myself as a strategist myself. Maybe not in the same league as some people, but I really enjoy the conversation about intentional media planning, execution, really how we authentically share our messages for our clients with the intended audience. And so I think, to have a conversation among two seasoned, veteran, really smart strategists. Yeah, I'm building you up.
No pressure. Yeah.
Hey, I was gonna call you like Michael Jordan and LeBron James, but then I was like, wow, that's really gonna probably set the stage.
I
want to jump into a conversation about media measurement. I think we're in this really interesting time, right? Where there's so much fragmentation with consumption. There's things coming out every single day. And as two that have been in this environment of really effectively planning and the methodology behind smart, accountable media execution, I think it's one of the most relevant things that we can talk about right now. So I'm going to jump off and I'm going to read you a quote, and you could throw a dart probably at any trade publication and find something like this. But in a survey of 300 advertising decision makers across the US and UK, 49% rated the lack of standard measurement across different channels and platforms as a top 5 obstacle. So as experienced strategists, how do you respond? Where would you rank this as a challenge? So Heather, I'll throw it to you first.
Yes, I think it is the largest challenge that we have faced in the past decade, honestly, with digital emerging as impression-based. It really was ambiguous on how to get down to reach and frequency. How many individual people are you actually reaching? And so that ambiguity, when we're so used to having firm numbers with traditional media, it just makes it very challenging. So the fact that it's starting to emerge is wonderful, and certain platforms have that capability, but how consistent is it across platforms? That's the difference and the challenge.
So you're ranking it number 1 challenge.
Yeah.
All right, Joanna.
Yeah.
Number 1?
I agree. I think it's number 1. I think that there's really no way that we can, as a media buyer, can stand in a place of authority, can stand in a place of integrity when we're looking at a buy. I mean, I think part of that article also talks about fatigue, so people are getting fatigued because they're seeing the same things over and over. When you do an impression-based buy, it is just, you're just out there blasting this message without any real understanding of how many people you're reaching, how many times you're connecting with them.
Yeah.
And so I would agree that I think how that everything's working together is critically important to understand at this moment in time.
Yeah. So I think, you know, this evolution of impression-based delivery has really, for us that have been doing it for a while, has thrown the monkey wrench into it, right? So we want to show a reach and frequency model, but sometimes that's not available. I mean, we've had conversations for a while now about the availability of accurate data. And Heather, I think you touched on it. Like, so you can do some, but you know, and some will provide certain aspects of measurement, but it's really the idea of cross-channel measurement and the accuracy. And you know, we've read a lot of industry brand leaders that are, I don't want to say screaming, but they're screaming. I mean, they're literally standing on the top of the hill in the trades with across the board and saying, we have to figure this out, because the result is billions of dollars of wasted spending and an audience fatigue. So can you guys talk a little bit about the downside of what I consider to be the downside in impression-based only delivery, and where we can't see certain aspects of? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the downside of impression-based is, you know, you need to know where your audience is, who your audience is. And as a media buyer, again, it's all about the audience and reaching that audience in the most efficient way. And 1 million impressions isn't necessarily going to accomplish what the end goal is. So, you know, I think the tendency is to just buy more, but then you have that fatigue. You have to have that reasonable frequency cap in order to not reach that point of annoyance and turn off customers.
Yeah, it's cheap, right? We can buy more.
Buy
Look
more.
at this.
Yeah.
We can buy more.
Right.
But the reality is we don't know about the duplication, and we don't really necessarily know the legitimacy of some of that delivery, right? There is the very real thing called fraud and bots that are impacting much more than we care to talk about on a monthly basis. So yeah, like anything to add to?
I would just say this. I think it's interesting as an industry that we've moved past a reach frequency model. We've moved past this because of the availability of data, because of the emergence of the opportunity, the excitement around certain opportunities. Mm-hmm. I think there's not to, you know, call anybody out, but I think as an industry, we've said, look over here, we're pasting, you know, 10 million impressions for you. We're doing all of this. And we're accepting and okay with the fact that these 10 million impressions are also delivering a 0.02% engagement, where you have tried and true media placement opportunities. Yeah. Things like print that are probably grossly under-delivered. I just read an article recently with a study. It was done in 2020. This is not something from like 2010, you know, this is like last year during the pandemic. And I mean, I don't know how much of it was guided by that. People are just at home reading, but they, you know, the recall studies, ROI studies, and print. But I think when we look at things from an impression-based perspective, instead of really digging into it and understanding, to Heather's point, how many people were really affected, how many people were really touching, and that, you know, there's not an understanding of how these channels all can work together to deliver effectively for an advertiser. So you have this concept now that's emerging between multimedia buying versus omni-channel buying, right? Which is what we're talking about. So right now we're living in this multimedia world, this multi-channel world, where I can tell you what my television's doing, I can tell you what my radio's doing, and then I've got these billion impressions or millions of impressions over here that are doing that. And there's value to all of it, right? But how is it all really coming together to effectively deliver for a client? And I think that's where, or an advertiser, and I think that's what you referenced the studies. I think that's where advertisers are now coming back around to, okay, we've tried this impression-based model. It's okay, and we're excited about it, and we're glad that we're on these platforms, but now it's got to relate to something bigger. I need to understand my audience in a different way. It's great that I can drive these certain like parameters. Yeah. I can dig into behaviors and intent and all of those things, but I also need to understand how many of my true audience am I actually reaching with this buy? What am I really spending on? Yeah. So.
And it's quality over quantity at the end of the day. And that's something that I have conversations with clients about regularly. And if I would rather have 100,000 quality impressions than a million junk impressions that just don't get the right people.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So I was just going to ask you, like, Heather, what are the conversations that you're having with your clients that you've had for a while where there's been this shift? And partially you just answered it is, I think there's this inclination. We had a client meeting a couple months ago with senior leaders, not just marketing at a specific client. And there was a senior leader that asked about, well, based on the use, the device use, right? So we're looking at statistics about where people are consuming, how much time they're spending on devices. Why wouldn't we just use these top two channels and spend all of our budget there? And so the question is, and Joanna touched on a little bit with even the print reference, is what are you telling your clients about how to look at that quality inventory and how these, even though there's not a uniform measurement metric, like how are you responding to your clients? Heather, like what are we doing here?
Right. So really the conversation for me begins and ends with research. And I will reiterate that to clients whenever they call and say, hey, have we thought about this? Hey, can we do X, Y, Z? Let's go back to the research and see what your target audience is consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bring it back to that all the time. And so, for example, digital, of course, is part of everybody's day. And you could be on 10 different platforms, social media included, streaming included, so all of the different platforms available, but do you have the budget to do it effectively? And so then it just comes down to where is that quality audience based on the research, based on cost efficiencies, and let that be the guide, because we could try everything and be everywhere. It just won't be the most effective use.
Yeah. So you're really talking about dilution, right? So the idea is that, we always want to try to, let's dip our toe in the water, but the reality is that if there's not a budget, and that's a hard conversation to have, right? Yeah. Is, well, we have to do this, but something else is going to have to give, right? And yes. Because the measurement isn't always the same, it's not comparing. Last month on the podcast, we were talking about streaming delivery, so the supply side, and the idea that all inventory isn't created equal. Right. And is it fair? Right? Is it fair to measure linear TV and streaming in a different way? So the idea of having a conversation with a client and saying, we're using this for brand, right? We're using linear for brand, and we know where we're delivering. But on the OTT side, we're looking at attribution. So we're looking at view through, we're looking at click through. Well, I'm not sure that that's a fair assessment. What is a fair expectation is that we have a way to look at that on the front end, right?
Right.
So I just think, as I think you said in the beginning, they're coming along, they're coming leaps and bounds, but they still aren't there. And I think that there's going to need to be a period of vetting out what is actually legitimate when it comes to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned testing, and I think that's the piece that's interesting for me. And I know, Heather, you buy sort of this way too. You look at, okay, so getting all of your traditional media channels, all the bases covered, let's squeeze out as much savings, efficiencies as we can on that side so that we're not jeopardizing an effective buy when we do test a Snapchat buy, or like there's these emerging medias. I mean, Snapchat's no longer emerging, I would venture to say. But, for a particular brand, it could be. Yeah. So mm-hmm. Understanding. And so I think when you have a mechanism where you are evaluating it, there's less risk because you aren't sacrificing, a baseline reach frequency. You aren't sacrificing a base number of impressions that you need to have so that there's less risk to a client to do that. It also could look like diversification is just adding to versus it, cannibalizing something over here. I think that's an important conversation.
Yeah, where's that additional audience? There was a statistic again on the streaming side where you're missing 41% of households if you don't have some kind of streaming play in your media plan.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about duplication? I mean, that is a significant miss if we're not including that. And so, it's the idea of combining everything into an effective strategy, and then setting. So can you talk a little bit, Heather, about like how are you setting the KPIs? Like, so how are you setting those expectations for your clients when it comes to all of these things? And even I'll throw this in, like how are you integrating other streaming services on the audio side, even like Pandora, who's been around for a while, Spotify, podcasts, there's this vast universe. So how are you doing that?
So I think it's important to remember that we talk about them as separate media allocations, but to the consumer, it's radio, it's TV.
Yeah.
They don't really think of it differently. So in terms of KPIs, I apply the same across those platforms. So, Hulu buys as I would television, broadcast TV. Same metrics for Spotify and Pandora as I do radio. It's an overall lift. It's a lift in awareness, a lift in website traffic, but ultimately for each and every client of mine, it's a lift in business. So everything that we're doing should increase sales, membership, patients, what have you.
Yeah. I felt like if we were on Jimmy Fallon, there would be like the live audience applause there.
Right.
It's about overall success of what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah. How
That's it. It's all about the client. So as long as they're meeting their goals, it's working.
Yeah. So if you brought on a new client that was in the retail business, so we'll just say retail, where right now, given the climate of today, where would you go to spend your first dollar if they didn't have any existing plan? So Joe, do you want to answer that?
That's a great question. So we're assuming they have no brand awareness either. None.
New.
Just brand new. So I love to hear Heather's response to this too, but I think for me it's a balance of brand awareness and then what are those really specific opportunities to engage with a ideal customer. So something like outdoor or television where you can get that broad brand awareness, but then you layer in these more specific channels like Amazon or programmatic or, where you literally are going after a specific consumer with a particular profile that you want to go after. So for me, it's a blend of those things. I'd love to hear Heather's take on that.
Yeah, so my mind went directly to the local retailer where they may not have a huge budget. So that's where I'm coming from. Okay. And if that's the scenario, then I would go completely Facebook, Instagram to start.
Sure.
80+% of people use them on a daily basis. They have the largest target audience of women 25 to 54, your main retail buy or buyer. So I would go there. You can get the most impressions at the most efficient price. So that's how I would start.
The most quality impressions. Quality, right? Because you said quality before, so it's not.
But they perform great though. Good click-through rates. They do. So I would start there. And then if they had a budget, obviously diversify into, like Joanna said, outdoor and television. But social media, those two platforms specifically right now, they're performing the best with engagement, with results, and with cost efficiency.
Yeah, great answers. I would agree with that too. So, fun question for you, because I think you mentioned Amazon in your answer. So there's this idea of, really duopoly between Facebook and Google, but I think when it comes to the overall taking over the world, so who takes over the world first, Amazon or Google?
Wow.
And like, remember everything that Google has underneath them, right? So they own a lot that we sometimes forget about.
It's like Thor versus the Hulk in Ragnarok
Right.
a little bit. I don't know if either one of them will take down the other one, but it'd be fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
It's interesting. It's an interesting question, Kevin, because it's funny when you look at some of the current statistics, right? So last year, Amazon actually had a 2% market share gain in their advertising platform of $130 billion industry. So not insignificant dollars, right? And then Google took it on the chin a little bit with a 1% loss. But putting it in perspective, like when you look at users or overall, so there's 200 million Prime users estimated right now, which equates to about 2.4 billion searches per day through Amazon, right? Which is a lot. It's huge.
Right.
But comparatively to Google, it's still 6.9 billion searches per day on Google. So it's a 3-time multiplier over, when you look at it. So,
right.
So, those gains of 2% and losses of 1%, also Google's responding to that. They just changed a lot of what they're doing for merchant services. They're offering a lot of free search opportunities for the little guys. I mean, this focus on doing business local is really growing. Yeah. I love that you said, you assumed it was a small business owner local, Heather. And I think that's what Google's responding to. And that's where Amazon has made some strides, I think, because, they're doing on Prime, you got percentage back. They had incentives if you did business with local or small businesses. Mm-hmm. So they were responding to that as well. So I think it's interesting to watch. But Google has really stepped up in terms of the professional services models that they're offering, but to small businesses, and even giving them a couple bones, like free search opportunities, featuring them in search responses on their shopping center. I mean, it's really interesting to watch.
So it's like a Hulk smash?
Yeah, I feel like it was like bam. Thor's not going down without a fight, though.
Yeah. Right. So Heather, who wins?
I'm going with Amazon. Wow. I have a love-hate relationship with Google.
Me too.
Oh my word. But I feel like Amazon, there's just so much more growth that's possible. And Google's just, like you said, they are coming out with new opportunities for local, and they have their grant programs and all that. But it's such a giant that I would love to see Amazon take them down.
Wrestle them to the ground. We're on a first name basis with our Amazon driver, so I'm not sure I'm not pulling for Amazon a little too, but yeah.
So what do you, speaking of those two giants, is there the next disruptor that you guys see coming down the pike? In all of the things that are emerging, are you able to preview that at all? Where you think that there might be something that either disrupts, for example, I think the idea of streaming video is this disruptor, right? There's the radio industry saw it with streaming video, TV saw it with streaming video. So what is the next disruptor? I guess every industry goes through this shift, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the growth and the continued growth of streaming. I can't think of anything like geofencing. That was the hot button years and years ago.
Yeah.
Streaming was the next thing that it was like, okay, how can I get on here? I just feel like it's just going to be continuing that growth in streaming and how to do it well so that it really mirrors a television buy and a radio buy. But I don't know. I was trying to think about what could be coming down next, and I'm not sure.
Well, do you have any ideas? Because we're going to go buy stock in whatever that is.
Right.
I know.
Yeah, I'll kind of go to the dark side of this question, Kevin, a little bit. I think the privacy laws could potentially come into play.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to force advertisers to get more creative in how they can deliver a message. And potentially even do an end around back to some traditional media channels, because you can't block a billboard unless unless you're living in Virginia and you're under the Lady Bird Johnson Act, right? Where they don't have outdoor. But so I think there could be some interesting plays there with subscription services and how, taking discounts if you're willing to watch ads. You see that model a little bit with Pandora. You've seen it in Spotify. You've seen it on some of these other channels. I wonder as the access to to consumers becomes more limited, that advertisers are going to have to get more creative, or media channels are going to have to get more creative in the ways that they can deliver the message to people.
Yeah.
And that's why content is king right now, because people seek out content. They want to understand whether it's a podcast like this, if it's a video content, if it's whatever that looks like. So I think it's interesting. I think it'll be an interesting thing to see how that shifts. We're already seeing it in the UK, very much limited in terms of how you've seen in financial industry with Google already, where you can't target by household income anymore. I mean, it's just kind of equalizing the playing field and how everybody can target people. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that disrupts the media industry.
Yeah, great answers. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It should help bring digital back down to a more realistic level too, because of that. And I mean, I know with 2021 strategy meetings was all about, okay, no cookie, like cookieless world, what are we doing? And so all of those plans are in effect so that they're not reactive and wondering what to do, but how are we being proactive now? And you're right, it's brought in a lot of different media that was maybe forgotten about or discounted in the past. But I think it'll just bring everything to a more even playing field.
Yeah, and I think the whole evolution over the last few years forced traditional media to step up their game, right? So when you talk to some of and not everyone, I mean, but I think when you talk to some of these channels, I'm impressed with how far they've come on the ability to customize content, to really zero in on an audience, and to share the message in a different way than simply an impression or a 15-second spot, right? How do you connect that brand with a community? Because at the end of the day, that's what I mean. As professional strategists that are charged by our clients to do this, that's the challenge, that we need to understand, build relationships, and understand all of these components that can work together for, as Heather said, for what we're trying to do in terms of the overall value for our client. Right?
You mentioned fragmentation earlier, and I think there is fragmentation, but I think there's also curation. So consumers are curating what they're allowing to come into their world by choosing the podcast they're listening to, subscribing to the channels they want to subscribe to, switch, cutting cords and all of these things, right? I think I look at an example like Drew Barrymore. I mean, she just launched, she is this influencer, mega influencer, I would say, to a certain extent, right? Yeah. She has the video component that she's doing. She just launched a print magazine that is, it's Drew magazine. Yeah. So we're seeing, so I do think like this resurgence of, vinyl came back. So I know you love print, Kev.
So did mullet. My daughter's in high school, and mullets came back. I'm not
everything does real. Eventually.
So I do think it'll be interesting to see how some of these influencers with this really curated content maybe influences that as well, and how advertisers becomes it becomes more sponsored content or things like that.
Yeah. So. Well, we're running out of time, and it just flew by, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I wish we would be able to do so much more. Maybe there'll be a part 2 down the road as we see
would
things.
Be fun.
So thank you, Heather. Thank you, Joanna. We're going to end with what I call the Media Minute.
Oh, man.
And it actually took more than a minute last time that we did this. But so we'll see how this goes. There's no right or wrong.
And there's
answers.
2 of us, so.
And there's 2 of you.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm gonna set this up. Heather, you can answer first. Joanna, you can answer second.
Got it.
Okay, for each question. How many streaming services do you have in your home?
7.
7? Okay. Joanna?
We have, I think, 7 as well. I was trying to add it up. We may have 9 with my husband's.
That one's always funny because people have to stop and think, where it was like, before it was like, hey, cable or satellite TV?
Right? How many TVs do you have in your house?
Exactly.
All right, Pandora or Spotify?
Spotify.
Neither.
Neither?
Is that terrible?
No.
I am an Audible girl, so
No.
that wasn't an option, but yeah.
Well, you just gave it.
Yeah.
You can say like C, none of the above. So you're going.
That's a C.
You're going on a trip. Waze or Google Maps?
Google Maps.
Google Maps.
Google Maps. Okay. TikTok, fad or here to stay?
Here to stay.
Yeah, I think it's here to stay, but I think it'll be rivaled by a lot of things.
There you go.
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes to scroll a social media platform. What's your go-to?
Facebook.
Instagram.
Are you team Apple or are you team Facebook when it comes to user privacy issues?
Apple.
Oh, I'm going to say Apple, even though, yeah. Kevin, that was a trick question because you know how I feel about Apple.
Yeah. Ad blockers. So ad blockers, yes, give me the ad blocker, or no, bring on the ads.
No, bring on the ads.
Yeah, bring on the ads.
Brings on the, yeah.
I have to. It's research.
Yeah. And last
I mean,
question.
it's what we do.
Right?
I know. Well, there's some guests that are like, even though I'm in the industry, I actually have an ad blocker.
Yeah.
I think last month's guest, Josh, he actually said that, and he was worried that he was going to get a call from his boss.
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah. Last question. Best original series that you know of right now on one of the platforms, and what platform is it on? So like binge watch, whatever.
So right now, Virgin River on Netflix.
My wife's on that one.
Yeah.
Loki.
Loki.
You know I love Marvels.
Disney
and Loki
Plus.
did not disappoint. Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So there's a lot of content out there that we can watch. It's, I think,
Yeah.
you know, as a parent, we also want to limit how much time we're
Screen
Yeah.
time.
setting a good example.
Right.
But great stuff. There's no doubt we're in an exciting time. And as marketers, as those that are entrusted with, you know, a lot of dollars for our clients, I just want to encourage the viewers that are tuning in to be intentional with those, with that and the trust that our clients are putting in, because that's really how we build authentic and meaningful relationships. Heather, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Joanna.
Great seeing you, Heather.
Me too.
Yeah.
So we'll see you next time on Forward with Kevin. Thank you.